Okay, we're here. We're on the air. Sorry, I'm a minute or two late here this morning. I hope everybody is well. I'm going to talk a bit about the latest thing that's been bouncing around in my head about language learning, and that is the power of curiosity. I'll talk about how it affects my own learning. I'll talk a little bit about what I found on the internet by Googling. But I think curiosity is a very powerful ingredient. I'll talk a little bit about what I found on the internet. Okay, I always forget to mute my iPad. I need the iPad in order to see the questions, and then I forget to mute it. Where I come from on this whole curiosity thing is if I think back to where I started, what sort of triggered my interest in language learning, it was a professor I had at McGill University who made me very interested in, very curious about French culture, French civilization, and therefore the French language. And that drove me to put so much effort into learning French and mastering French. And it was far more powerful than all the teaching that I received in school. Triggered my curiosity. I was curious about France, about this different country. Now, granted, in Canada, we had, I was living in Quebec, which is also French speaking, but that was not what triggered my curiosity. What triggered my curiosity was, actually, it was a very attractive book with pictures of, France in the 16th century, 17th century, Molière, Racine, Voltaire, all these things, for whatever reason. And we had a very good, this professor was very witty. He challenged us. He made us curious. He made us want to learn. All right. So that's kind of the beginning. And I thought of that because, I follow different people on Twitter. And so there's this one person who's an English teacher or a language teacher, I think not an English teacher, a language teacher, or maybe a Spanish language teacher. And she sort of said, the important thing in my classroom is teaching social justice. And I thought to myself, you know what? Language learning has become such a big part of my life because a professor was able to tweak my curiosity about French language and culture, which then led me, first of all, to achieve success in, I wouldn't say mastering French, but achieving certainly a high degree of fluency in French, then the confidence that I could learn Chinese, and then it just went on and on. So it was triggering that curiosity that was a powerful educational moment. Not trying to push some teachers' values about social justice onto students. And I think a lot of the language learning as well is based on the idea that the teacher is going to push something at the learner. You got 25, 30 kids in a classroom, they're captive. You're going to force them to do drills or tests, or you're going to force whatever you learned at language, on your TEFL course on these poor guinea pigs. The key is to generate that, to trigger that curiosity. And I find that it happens with me. For example, I start into Arabic, and there's a lot of explanation about the grammar. And of course, it's information overload. So I might pick out one or two things there that I kind of understand and start to notice, and then all the rest of the explanation that's pushed at me is lost on me until much later on. And somewhere I was reading in a book, so I like to buy several different books. So I'm reading this book on Arabic, and they talk about the subjunctive. And of course, I've been fed information about this, that there is a subjunctive in Arabic. And in all of these mini stories that I've listened to 30, 40, 50 times, I never, ever noticed the subjunctive. The subjunctive in Arabic is like, whereas if, uridu an akul, like I want to say, actually, uridu an, you have to akula, so that you get an A at the end of the present tense. So that's the subjunctive. It's not very difficult, but I didn't notice it. It had been explained to me. I had no interest in it. It wasn't happening for me. Once I had, for whatever reason, all of a sudden I was interested in that. Now I'm interested. So I look it up. I'm curious. And then I start noticing it in the mini stories. And every time I hear it now, I notice it because I became curious about it. And the best time to learn grammar sometimes if I'm listening to my mini stories, which have a lot of basic grammar in them, and I'm curious about a certain structure, and this doesn't have to be in Arabic, it can be in Spanish or any language. When you are curious about this particular point of grammar, that's when you should go and look up the explanation or look up the table. Not that you'll remember it all, but you are ripe, you are ready to receive that information. I Googled just before our little session today, I Googled on this whole question of curiosity, and there's a lot of literature about curiosity. And apparently when we are curious, our brains change, and we are, again, I'm not going to try and paraphrase these scientific, explanations, but we are more receptive to learning. So triggering curiosity is extremely important. So here we are in our 90-day challenge. We should be using the power of curiosity to keep us going. So it might be curiosity about some item that you might find in the LingQ library, something you want to hear about and learn about in the language. It might be curiosity. You might be feeding that curiosity. Like I was saying, I think the other day, reading about Iran and the Azeris there at Tabriz, and then I looked up under Google, and so I'm curious now. I want to learn, and so this is this curiosity. And initially, when we get a lot of information pushed at us, it's very difficult to sort through there, or to try to retain anything. And there's too much for us to be curious about it. But the other thing that happens is, as we pick up little bits of information, as I have in the case of Arabic, got a sense of some of the things that, how the masculine, feminine works and this kind of thing, then I'm now ready to have an interest in something else. And so, cultivating that curiosity and then also not being frustrated that certain aspects of the language, which we're not yet curious about, we don't yet understand, we aren't able to use, it doesn't really matter. There's a gradual process. I should add, in terms of curiosity, I also find that if I listen to something and there are lots of words there that I don't understand, or even a few that I don't understand, that again tweaks my curiosity. So, if I go from my listening where a lot of stuff was fuzzy, then I'm very curious to read it. And then I'm more receptive to learning those words or phrases. In fact, in many ways, I think our playlist, and I think a lot of people don't use the playlist. Study a lesson, put it on the playlist. Because the first time you study the lesson, there's so much stuff that you won't remember. And then you listen to it, and the listening is so easy to do. I can do it wherever I am. And I like to get in, and I've said this before, we should maybe emphasize listening more at LingQ. Get in an hour a day, wherever you are. And then while you're listening, you're kind of fading in and out. But those things that you're curious about, you're going to fade into occasionally, like, for example, the subjunctive. But then you will also trigger this curiosity about the content, and therefore you want to go and study the lesson. So the playlist, the audio, the things that we can easily find time to listen to are triggering our curiosity about the actual, text, wanting to read the text and review the words. In that regard, I'm having some discussion with Mark about the playlist, and there's been some comment about how we should make the playlist better, more flexible, and unlimited, and all this kind of stuff. One of the problems in a system like LingQ is that there's so much functionality that a large number of people are totally confused. And so therefore, the more functionality we add, the more options you can add. You can have, folders or albums in your playlist, and you can do this and you can do that. The more settings and functions, the more people get confused. So there's always a sort of a tug back and forth, like how much complexity do we want to introduce in order to satisfy a certain portion of our users, when in fact we might just be confusing a much larger number of our users. The bigger problem is that a lot of people don't know the playlist exists. The playlist is very important because that's how you track your listening, and it's important to have a record of your listening. How much have you listened this week? How much have you listened since you started learning the language? It's an important statistic to have. You can only track it if you listen in the lesson or on the playlist. If you download some audio and put it into iTunes and listen away from Link, you aren't then generating these statistics. Anyway, we were talking back and forth. Personally, I would like the ability to be able to listen. If I have a course like the mini stories, I want to be able to listen to lesson 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in sequence, because when I'm away, I'm in the gym or I'm doing something, I don't want to have to go back each time to the lesson to move to the next lesson to listen to the next lesson. Now, we have the ability to set the lesson so that it repeats, so we can listen to the same lesson over and over again. We don't have the ability to set the course so that it'll automatically go to the next lesson, the next lesson. So you can do either a repeat scenario or sequentially proceed in the course. So I wouldn't mind seeing that in there. The question is then, how do we introduce that? How do we explain that so it doesn't confuse people? So, you know, those are some of the issues that we struggle with. Any comments people had would be welcome. I thought I might just share the screen here just a little bit to delve into this whole area of curiosity and how it applies to language learning in general and to LingQ in particular. So I am going to share my screen. So let's see, start screen share. And I don't know whether this present to everyone is necessary, but whatever, I clicked on it. So here we have the lessons. If we go to the library in Spanish, and because I don't think Arabic is that widely studied, so I go to Spanish. So here again, I have my lesson feed. So are there things in here that, you know, there's such a variety even within our own library. So you might want to do mini stories. You might want to read my book in Spanish, okay, about how I learn languages. You might want to do Zorro. You might want to, you know, do some news items, you know. Estados Unidos califica a la Guardia Revolucionaria de Irán como grupo terrorista. Maybe that's of interest. So there is quite a variety of things that you can study in terms of, you know, catering to your curiosity. So if we look at my book for the sake of argument, and we open that. And so one of the things that's now available, I said that, you know, we should.
Vaya.
Okay, so say vaya, okay, is ir, to go, right? Okay, go is the correct answer.
Vaya.
So with that, now we have some grammatical explanation. So if you're curious about a verb, you know, it tells you it's from ir, it's subjuntivo presente. You can go and actually, now I'm curious, like, how does this work? You can go to verb in our, we have a grammar resources now in a number of languages. You should be aware of that. If you go to your profile here, grammar guide, it's not in every language, but a lot of languages have them. And so then you can read a quick overview. And these grammar guides, we've done them as simple as possible. So these are abbreviated overviews of the grammar, but it gives you a chance at a moment when you are interested that you can go in and have a quick look and then quickly retreat back to your text. So while you are curious about something, you look it up. I did mention the playlist. So, you know, a lot of people don't know it's there. A lot of people don't even know that there are these different, you know, you can view the course, you can manually add to your reading and listening totals, although many people don't do that. Or you can add this to the playlist. It's that simple. So you should make sure and add it to the playlist. So again, I just advise you to add your audio to the playlist, because that's helping to generate that curiosity. You're listening, you're sometimes fading in and out, but then there are questions that arise in your brain, questions about vocabulary, questions about grammar. Then you want to go to the lesson, read it. If you come across a verb or something and you're curious about the grammar, you can look up, and the grammar, you can look it up by nouns, by adjectives, quickly review something while that sort of moment of curiosity is there. So that's kind of what I wanted to say on curiosity. And yeah, now let's see what sorts of questions we have. All right. Now I see here, by the way, very fast. Okay, I will slow down. What's up my language learning friend? Mostly reading in Spanish. And how about you? La la la. Okay. Now these are just chit chats. The last couple of the audio is glitchy. I don't know what to do about that. How to learn French easily? There is no easily. You have to, all languages are learned in the same way, lots of listening and reading. Oh, fazer live in Portuguese. We could do that. I know basic, but probably Steve, is Mark back from his vacation? No, but Mark is coming down to Palm Springs tomorrow, and we'll chat with him there. Huh. This business of my connection, we'll have to look into it. I don't know why that would be. Like how to deal with Spanish subjunctive. Okay. Well, again, how to deal with Spanish subjunctive. First of all, you have to be curious about it, and you have to start noticing when you see it or hear it, and you have to go to the explanation again, and slowly you'll get a sense of how that works. How can we be curious at the beginning? Okay, no, at the beginning, it's difficult to be curious. The point, certainly in my own experience, there's so much new information. I mean, we have to be curious about the language. So I have to be curious about Arabic or Persian and Arabic culture, and I have to have that level of curiosity. But then about the specifics of the language, at first there's so much information that we can only really focus in on one or two. That's part of the problem when teachers think they're going to teach you the basics. There's too much. It's too much. So a lot of it goes in one ear and out the other. But eventually you get better. Do you have any specific advice learning a language for people who are dyslexic? This is from folks here for you. I think that link. I think that reading is very closely related to listening, and there's all kinds of research that shows that. And therefore, if you have listened to something many times, then it should become easier to read, because you are. It's like when I decipher. I'm dyslexic in Arabic because I try to decipher the words, and I'll jump to conclusions as to what the word is, and they're totally wrong because you're eager to guess at the word. And I have trouble reading the individual letters because they, it's not so consistent as to how you pronounce them. However, if I have listened to the lesson, and then I also have text-to-speech available, all of that is helping me decipher the Arabic and slowly building up confidence in reading. And I would be very curious to see if something like LingQ with the natural voice audio, which you can listen to a few times, build up your curiosity, build up your momentum. Then the ability when you again confront the word and you got it wrong, but you can press text to speech and hear it, whether all of that doesn't gradually ease us into reading and into reading more and more. And the more we do anything, the better we get at it. And I would be very interested if people who are struggling readers, whether this kind of approach would also be applicable to people who have dyslexia or other difficulties in reading. Fast, Kate Kiss. Okay, hey, Steve. Okay, so Gustavo, eu não pode resolver esta questão aqui. The problem getting on to LingQ on his cell phone, you have to, você tem que perguntar al customer service at LingQ. Tenho tentado entrar pelo celular, mas não consigo. So it looks like there is a problem with, Eric, if you're listening, there seems to be a problem with cellular users accessing LingQ. Isso é iOS or Android? Okay, let's follow up on that. Who writes the grammar resources? We commission different people for different languages. I think we went to an online outsourcing site, and found people and reviewed what they did, and found people who were good at it. So it's a very much sort of concise, I think we said maximum 6,000 words grammar. So who writes it? No. Are there going to be grammar resources for all language on LingQ eventually? We haven't had any response. So it's difficult for us to keep doing things when we get little feedback. So if people come back to us and say, I really like these grammar resources, can you do it for language X? Then that motivates us to do that. How far do you think the learner needs to go when it comes to grammar? Well, grammar, in other words, understanding how the language works is important. You have to understand how the grammar works. Everybody wants to speak correctly. Everybody wants to speak well. And a large part of learning to speak correctly is simply listening and reading, so that your brain will get used to the language. And the brain will notice many things, but some things the brain won't notice. And that's why you look at grammar from time to time, and it describes something that you kind of have half noticed or maybe didn't notice at all. And after having read this explanation, then you become curious and you start to notice it. And through that process, gradually you begin to speak more and more correctly. And we all want to speak as correctly as we can. And yet I know many fluent speakers of English who regularly make the same mistake. So it's not the end of the world, but I think we all aspire to speak more and more correctly. Again, how do you guys battle with all the copyright content going on the LingQ site? I've seen tons of content originating from other sources there. Well, if you see content that seems to be, copyrighted, please let us know. In some cases, some of these sites, like I can't remember in Spanish, they agree to let us use their material. But if there is material that we have to ask them for permission, and if they don't agree, we remove it. We do not police it all the time, because there's content being added all the time. But if anybody points out material that shouldn't be there, we remove it. I just started to learn my fifth language will be Japanese. Wish me stamina. Yes, in sensatez, I wish you stamina. What Arabic book do you use? I have a number of Arabic books. My main source has been our mini stories, but I bought a Teach Yourself. I bought an Arabic for Dummies. I bought Assimil. I bought, there was a Manuel de l'Arabe Moderne, a French book, and a Harrops, which is also French. Can you add context reverso in German for French speakers on LingQ? I will, Eric, again, if you're listening, make a note of that. We can contact our guy, our virtual assistant, and we can do that. Yes, please let us know if you would like dictionaries added. Have you ever done any ancient languages? Well, we do have Hebrew and Latin. What Arabic book are you using? Teach Yourself, Assimil. I've used them all. Hello from Latvia, Mr. Steve. Latvia, I've been to Riga, enjoyed it very much. Now that you learned the subjunctive, would you consider reading with harakat? Yeah, I have seen the passage described. I don't read with harakat because the bulk of the stuff that I read doesn't have harakat. These are all the little diacritics that help you with the pronunciation. So if I now go to a podcast from France 24 or Al Jazeera, and I put it on my automatic transcription service, what I get back doesn't have harakat. So I basically have avoided harakat. If I don't know how to pronounce a word, I use text-to-speech. It's not, but I can't speak. Of course, this is Mohammed Menaba. Yeah, you have to continue doing that, and you have to start speaking. A lot of listening and reading builds up your vocabulary, but at some point, you have to start speaking. And when you start speaking, it's going to be difficult. And only by speaking more will you speak better. And also, don't worry. Don't worry about your problems. Give yourself credit for what you're able to do. Saludos desde Argentina. I was in Buenos Aires and Mendoza. and Iguazu, and had a great time. Okay, thank you for your Korean videos. You mentioned that you exercise while listening. I tried that a few days ago, and it does wonders. Listening gets me motivated to exercise and vice versa. Absolutely. I think this is such a big deal and we don't have to be totally focused all the time. But if we can develop the habit of listening while doing other things, cleaning the house, exercising, we get a double benefit. We listen more, and yet we clean the house more, or we exercise more. And I find that I'm not able just to sit down and listen, sit in a chair and listen. I can't do that. But if I'm doing something else, I can listen. So I think it's important. I somehow think we should stress listening more at LingQ. I think people should get in an hour a day, 2 hours a day of listening, depending on some days. What advancements in technology would you like to see to aid in language learning? I mean, what I would most like to see in language learning is I would like to see there is not enough, for example, in Arabic, intermediate content. I think generally there is a lack of intermediate content. If people would simply talk to each other in their native language and transcribe it, or maybe we put it up on the transcription service. Because typically in a conversation, it's easier, there's fewer difficult words, and it helps bridge the gap. In a casual conversation takes you then to the next level. Two things I would like to see. I would like to see casual conversations transcribed, and I would like to see nonfiction history, but slightly simplified. I'm not so keen on simplified stories, because that strikes me as kind of artificial, but simplified explanations of the history of Persia, the history of, Iraq, in my case, studying Arabic, the history of Morocco, the history of, even, Andalusia, southern Spain, all the stuff or Arab world before Islam and all that stuff. If it were somehow, a history of Arab civilization in 20 lessons, simplified, I would be all over that. And with audio, like audio and text. And in other languages as well, nonfiction, history, geography, kind of stuff, somewhat simplified, and casual conversations, audio and text. If we had like an explosion of that kind of content, that would probably do more for language learning than any specific technological change. How would you recommend preparing to speak while visiting a foreign country, and how to have the most opportunity to speak and get the most out of your speaking in a foreign country? Very difficult. Essentially, you have to work on your comprehension, on your vocabulary as much as possible before you go. So I visited Portugal once. I had spent 3 or 4 months. At that time, we didn't have Portuguese at LingQ, so I listened to living language. I listened to whatever I was able to get a hold of. Went to Portugal, and everybody answered me in English. I was basically incapable of using the language there. So then I said, the next time I go, I'm going to work at it harder. By that time, we had Portuguese at LingQ, and so I just did a lot more listening. Got myself to the point where I listened literally to over 100 hours of these Portuguese podcasts from Radio Portugal. So I was really into the language. And the second time I went to Portugal, people would speak to me in Portuguese. So the secret is to get your level up to the point where more and more people will speak to you in the language. Now, in terms of arranging for people to talk to, I mean, it depends on the country, but in countries where taxis are cheap, taxi drivers are great teachers. Sit in the front and talk. And so if it's a $5, $10 taxi ride for 30 minutes, you get that much, language instruction. I visited Prague, and I had teachers there, and I arranged twice a day to be with the teacher, because you can't just, with all due respect to Benny, you can't just randomly approach people and expect them to talk to you. That's not common. You can walk into a store, hope they talk to you in the language. The most reliable, people to talk to, I've found have been taxi drivers. So I guess try to organize it ahead of time if you have friends there, and make sure you're as well prepared as possible before you get there. Previous video, you convert MP4s and MP3s for use in LingQ. Could you explain how you do that? Okay. I have a thing called MP3 converter free. All right. I wonder if I can demonstrate that. Let's see here. I'm going to try and demonstrate that. We'll see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to share this screen here. Start screen share. Oh, that's not going to work. Let's see what happens if I do this. Oh, shush. Now, bear with me here. Okay. I hope everyone can see this. Let's see. This hasn't caught up yet. Okay. So here are my podcasts. Okay. So here's a podcast in Arabic. This guy here, let's say. So I take this and I slide it down onto my MP3 free converter. So this thing is now converting this to MP3. So the podcast is a video. The podcast, I should have explained that. The podcast is a video. This one is from Al Jazeera. And so then it converts into MP3 file. No, I'm a little bit confused here. No, this is kind of confusing. What have I done here? Okay. Where did that guy go? Where did my file go? Okay, that click was to indicate that it's complete. Now, because of this file sharing, I'm sort of messing up pretty badly here. I don't want this one. Let's see if I can find it. So here we are. Okay, so here I have, it's been converted, right? So what I do is I click on it and it'll show up here. Where are we? Today at 10:33. This is the file. This guy I don't need anymore. So I can get rid of this guy. This is today at 10:33. What I do, I don't know whether I need to do this or not, but I take this file and I park it over here in my, oh, well, it already is. The point is I park it in my desktop and then I take that and I go to Vocomatic and I take that file, put it on Vocomatic, and it gets transcribed and I have an account with them. And so that's all. I think I probably thoroughly confused everyone, but let me see if I can get back to where I was here. Get rid of this, get rid of this, stop. Okay, now presumably that confused everyone, but MP3 converter, maybe Google and you'll find it. That is how I convert my MP4 files to MP3 files. All right, that didn't work out too well here. How many months into your full-time Chinese study did you start to feel comfortable? Comfortable takes a long time. I mean, 8 or 9 months, I was helping Canadian businessmen in China at the Canton Trade Fair, interpreting more or less well, never feeling, this idea that you're going to somehow automatically feel comfortable, you always feel a little uncomfortable. You always feel that you could have done better. You always struggle a bit, but I was translating and interpreting after 8 or 9 months. Do you know the Tamazight language? It's an old North African language of the Berber people. I heard of it. I met people who spoke it, but I don't know anything about it. Which dialect of Arabic did you learn, recommend? I have a phrase book that teaches Egyptian, supposedly one of the most widespread and understood. Yeah, I struggle with this, Ultimately, I decided to learn modern standard Arabic. Now, all kinds of people advise you to learn Levantine, Egyptian, and stuff. But I live in Vancouver. I have limited opportunity to speak Arabic. If I look for resources online, they're overwhelmingly in modern standard Arabic. A large part of my interaction with the Arabic language is listening and reading. And therefore, the resources for listening and reading in modern standard Arabic are far more available. All these interviews on Al Jazeera, panel discussions, interviews, whatever, news articles, podcasts, they're all in modern standard Arabic. I am convinced that, and I have listened, we have at LingQ some Levantine Arabic, and I've listened to it. I've listened to some Egyptian Arabic. If I were to go and visit, Jordan or Lebanon or Egypt, and I had to learn some local, I think I could, at least to understand it, I could do that fairly quickly. And even in Morocco, where the dialect is very different, I was able to have conversations with taxi drivers in modern standard Arabic. All Arabic school children learn modern standard Arabic. So theoretically, any educated person understands modern standard Arabic. So that was my strategy, but obviously if someone is going to work in the Gulf or work in Lebanon or whatever, then they will adopt a different strategy. Is it possible to import comic books in the future, since I would read them in my target language? As long as the text can be, converted into a digital format, then the answer should be yes. I don't know much about comic books, so I can't give you more of an answer than that. Any good Japanese literature for advanced learners you recommend? What materials did you use for Japanese reading practice? Well, I was in Japan. I was reading newspapers every day, and I buy books in Japan. I just buy books and read them. And for advanced learners, I would do what I did for Polish. I would look up ebooks for which audiobooks are available, even if I buy them. So I have a matching ebook and audiobook. I import the ebook into LingQ, and I listen to the audiobook. I don't try and match the audio to each lesson because that's so much work. It's not worth it. I can't give you any better advice than that. Speak for me. Okay, don't try to imitate native speakers because they don't speak correctly. Yeah, in every language, there are native speakers who make mistakes. But if you can speak as well as a native speaker, you're doing fine. Who else are you going to listen to? Because the native speaker typically speaks more correctly, or let's put it this way, different native speakers are influenced by the language as it is spoken around them. So there are lots of people now who say less cars instead of fewer cars. There's lots of people who say I would have went instead of I would have gone. And so if there are a lot of people around them who speak that way, then that so-called incorrect form of the language will grow and grow and may one day become standard usage. You cannot do better than to listen to a native speaker, in my opinion. What is the most difficult tense of French, or what would you say is the most difficult part of learning French? I think people get too worked up over tenses. It's going to be difficult in all those Romance languages to get the verb endings right every time. I think personally the difficulty in French is that the way the language sort of, the liaison from one word to the next makes it more difficult to listen, to understand when you're listening than say Spanish. But every language has its difficulties. And I see it as I don't know. I can't tell you the answer because I learned my French through so much listening and reading. It's not like when I learned Slavic languages, I quickly identified that, case endings, verbs of motion, and aspects of verbs were the most difficult issues. In French, I have no idea. How should I start to study Chinese? Okay, actually, I think I skipped here. Is self-vocalizing useful, or do you have a native like command, or should we stop? Everybody self-vocalizes, I think, to some extent when we're learning a foreign language. That's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to listen a lot, and you will gradually have a better sense of how the words are pronounced while you're self-vocalizing. What motivates you to learn a language? Changes after. What if? Yeah. If you lose interest in the language, then you got to go off to something else. How should you start Chinese? The only difference between Chinese and other languages is that you need to put in my opinion, emphasis on learning the characters, which is a lot of work. So when do I start listening without a transcription? There just comes a point where I'm comfortable listening and it's just too much trouble to go and look for the transcription, because I feel there's so few words in there that I didn't understand that I don't want to read it. I enjoy listening and I'm learning while listening. If I'm really curious about something, I might, get it transcribed. But in most cases, I understand enough that similarly with reading, it comes a point where the listening and reading diverges. So I will read on LingQ and pick up some vocabulary that way, and I just listen, separate from any transcript. Suppose you're already relatively fluent in a language. In your experience, how many links per page would be too many, in the sense that maybe the material is too complex for you? Well, you know what? I think that 10 to 15% is a good level. If there's only a few percent, it's almost not worth it. Once you get over 15%, it's getting difficult. I would say max 20%. Now, bear in mind that depending on what material you're studying, some of that may be, place names, proper names, so that 20% is really 15%. But somewhere in that range, 10 to 20% is kind of the sweet spot in terms of learning new words and yet not being overwhelmed. Do I actively listen to music? No, I don't. No, I don't. Just to curious, are you interested in philosophy? Have you ever thought to introduce this subject to LingQ? I mean, most of our content is provided by others. So if people put philosophy texts there, then that's what will be there. And there are people who are interested in philosophy. I am to a small extent, but I'm more interested in history and literature. Muito bom, senhor. Obrigado por mais precioso video. Thank you, everybody. You're so cool. Thank you. And blah, blah, blah. Chinese é a língua do futuro. Yeah, I think, do you find that when learning Spanish, it's hard for the brain to adjust to recognize the subject of the sentence, since conjugations are used and not subjects? No, but I think that as in anything in a new language, it takes us time to get used to it. It takes us time for that to be natural, because our brains are conditioned to learn, and to manage our own language. Therefore, say English speakers speaking Spanish will always want to put the pronoun in there, yo, 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 I, whereas in Spanish and many other languages, the personal pronoun is often omitted. You just gradually get used to it. It's, learning a language is learning to imitate sort of the behavior of a different cultural group. And that includes the sort of patterns of the language. You gradually get better and better at imitating that behavior. Many polymaths follow you, what teachers do. Can you focus on teaching? Well, I mean, to me, teaching, and I have never been a classroom teacher, but I'll let that go. Teaching to me is all about turning on the learners. Easier said than done if you've got 25 more or less distracted kids in a classroom. But somehow I would like to find some way to trigger the curiosity, the interest, the motivation, and then allow them to come to me when they have a question about the language, a question about the country, a question about anything. Try and make them come to me for what they're interested in, rather than me deciding for them, today we're going to do the subjunctive, then I'm going to test you on the subjunctive, whether you like it or not, and then we'll consider the subjunctive is now done, you're supposed to know it, and then we'll move to the conditional. Somehow, I feel that teachers have got to trigger that, like happened to me with my French teacher, trigger that interest in the subject in some aspect of it. They don't have to love everything. But that's, again, why if the teacher says, you should be interested in French films, and the learner says, I'm not interested in French films. So you have to find things that they're interested in, and people here talking about comics or manga or anime or whatever it might be, let them find those things that interest them. In fact, if I wouldn't, like in Canada, everybody has to learn French. Well, what if the kid doesn't want to learn French? There should be more freedom to learn whatever language interests them, because there's so much content, there's so many resources available. You don't have to have a certified teacher of French or Chinese. In fact, we should certify teachers as language learning coaches who know how to stimulate the learner, trigger their curiosity, and then help them find the resources that they need in whatever language they're interested in. That's my comment on teaching. Okay, and so Katyusa says that her teacher says that learning languages is linear and not gradual. I don't quite understand, but I think learning languages is a very fuzzy process. We don't build on the basic building blocks, the basics, sort of the basics of the language. It sort of comes at us. It's not obvious that the present is easier than the past tense, that there's any particular order. The brain sorts out the order in which it's going to remember certain things or get used to certain structures. And therefore, all we really need to do is to make sure that we expose ourselves to as much content as possible, hopefully not too difficult. Comprehensible is important, like where you have a chance of understanding 60, 70, 80% of it, where you're interested in it. And as long as you feed the brain enough of this kind of material, and then when you're curious about a point of grammar, look it up, that we will gradually learn. Now, is that a linear process? I don't see it so much as a linear process. I'm studying English, but what is the secret to speak fluency? Speak more. All right. The secret to fluency is A, good comprehension, because you have to speak a lot, speak with people. If you don't understand what they're saying, you can't maintain a conversation. So build up your comprehension skills, your vocabulary, and then speak a lot, and don't worry about how well you do. Now, I'm taking the workbook every month. I'm not very well, Steve. Have you been able to put the 5 habits of highly effective people on LingQ? What happened with that? 7 habits it was. And no, I wasn't able, because I couldn't, this is from Oscar, I couldn't get a form of the text. First of all, I can't put it on LingQ to share, but even for my own use, the ebook that I bought and paid for is DRM protected or something. In any case, I gave up on that. I have the audiobook. I would love to be able to study the ebook on LingQ, but I haven't been able to convert it into a format that I can use. But at any rate, I couldn't share it. If you want to learn traditional, is it better to start off with simplified first? No. If you want to learn traditional, start with traditional. Even like when we learned, I learned traditional first and then learned, it's easier to go from traditional to simplified than the other way around. That's my advice. Now, it may be that there's all kinds of evidence that the reverse is true. I don't know. Is reading nonfiction in other languages, such as Anthony Beevor's Second World, better than children's stories? It is to me far better, far better. First of all, translations typically use less, difficult words. Like translators tend to use, higher frequency words. So translations are always easier. Second of all, if you're reading the history of the Second World War, presumably you're interested, so that's good. Presumably you know something about the subject, so that's good. Children's stories, like I have no interest. Children's stories introduce vocabulary like the bird, the rabbit, and all kinds of stuff that's maybe not that relevant or high frequency. And I have always preferred history and translation, simplified history to children's stories. Discovered your channel yesterday by searching for going, and I'm just watching you live today. Hello from Brazil. Sensei konnichiwa, blah, 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 blah. Which is the best applicative for learning language, and what do you think about Memory Palace? Okay, I am not into the sort of Memory Palace type of things. I have never been willing to put the effort into developing these mnemonic tricks and stuff like that. It may work for people. I don't use them, so I can't comment. You know, best app for learning languages. Obviously, I'm prejudiced. I am involved with LingQ and I use LingQ, so to me, that's the best app. Is German missing some mini stories? Yes. Now in German, now again, we have relied on volunteers to help us translate and record these mini stories. We have had a better response in some languages than others. In some cases, we have had to pay to have them done. If there is strong demand for the additional mini stories in German, we can also pay to have them done. We are waiting for, you know, volunteers who have promised to do them and they haven't done them. But Johan, if you're interested and if others are interested, and I know you have talked it up on the forum, then that kind of forces us to do something. Yeah. All right, I'm going to leave here as well. I've got to run. I have an Arabic class starting at 11. All right, thank you, and bye for now.